There is a moment, right after a great battle is decided, when the world does not yet know what has happened. Armies are still retreating, couriers are still riding, kings are still holding their breath. And in that sliver of silence between the cannon smoke and the morning headlines, a single man in London allegedly stood at the centre of one of the greatest financial manoeuvres in history and walked away with a fortune that would reshape the British economy for generations. That man was Nathan Mayer Rothschild, and the battle was Waterloo. Now, you have probably heard a version of this story, maybe a dramatic version with carrier pigeons and secret codes, maybe a darker version involving conspiracy and betrayal. Some of those tellings are exaggerated, some are outright invention. But the core of it, the actual documented history, is already extraordinary enough to leave you staring at the ceiling at midnight. So let me tell you what we actually know, how it really worked, and why the truth of it is, in almost every way, more astonishing than the myth. To understand Nathan Rothschild at Waterloo, you first have to understand where he came from. And that means going back to a narrow lane in Frankfurt, Germany called the Judengasse, the Jews' Lane. In the 18th century, this was one of the most famous and most restricted Jewish ghettos in all of Europe. The residents were confined there by law. They could not own property outside its walls. They could not move freely through the city after dark. The lane was locked at night and on Christian holidays. And yet, within those walls, something extraordinary was building. Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the patriarch of the dynasty, was born into that lane in the mid-1700s. He started as a dealer in rare coins, which turned into a small money-lending operation, which turned into a banking relationship with some of the most powerful German nobility of the era. Mayer Amschel had 5 sons, and he was clever enough to understand something that most merchants of his time missed entirely. The future of wealth was not in one city. It was in a network. He sent each son to a different European financial capital, one to Vienna, one to Naples, one to Paris, one stayed in Frankfurt to anchor the home operation, and one, the most gifted, the sharpest, the one his father reportedly called his most capable boy, went to England. That was Nathan. Nathan Mayer Rothschild arrived in England around 1798. He was in his early 20s, he spoke limited English, and he had no particular social connections in a country that, at the time, was deeply suspicious of outsiders. He started in Manchester, of all places, in the textile trade, importing finished goods, learning the rhythms of English commerce, building relationships with merchants and bankers who initially underestimated him. That was, it turns out, a strategic mistake on their part. By the early 1800s, Nathan had moved to London and established himself on St. Swithin's Lane in the heart of the city. And I want you to picture the City of London at this moment in history. This is the financial beating heart of an empire that is fighting for its life against Napoleon Bonaparte. Britain has been essentially at war for over a decade. The cost of those wars is staggering. Governments need money, enormous amounts of it, and they need it fast. The question of who controls that money flow is not just a financial question, it is a geopolitical one. Nathan Rothschild understood this with a clarity that most of his contemporaries did not. He was not simply a banker. He was building an infrastructure for moving capital across borders at a time when that was brutally difficult, politically complicated, and strategically vital. And the British government needed exactly that. Here is something that often gets glossed over in the dramatic versions of this story. Rothschild's financing of the British war effort was not a single dramatic bet. It was a sustained, years-long operation of astonishing complexity. The British Army operating in the Iberian Peninsula under Wellington needed to be paid, not in letters of credit, not in promises, in gold coin, hard currency that soldiers and local suppliers would actually accept. Getting gold from London to soldiers in Portugal and Spain, through a continent crawling with French troops and hostile customs agents, was a logistical nightmare. Nathan Rothschild solved it. He built a courier and payment network that ran across the family's 5 European branches, rerouting gold through neutral territories, using the Paris branch under his brother James to convert currencies and move funds, and delivering actual specie, gold and silver coin, to Wellington's paymasters with a reliability that left the British government quietly amazed. One contemporary estimate suggested that Rothschild moved the equivalent of millions of pounds in gold for the British military over the course of the wars. The British government essentially came to depend on him. And in exchange, Rothschild received something perhaps even more valuable than profit. He received trust, he received access, and he received information. That last part is where the Waterloo story really begins. The Rothschild network was, at this point in history, probably the best private intelligence network in Europe. Not in a cloak-and-dagger spy sense, though there was certainly an element of that, but in the simpler, enormously powerful sense of having reliable, fast, well-compensated couriers in every major city, with relationships at ports and border crossings that ensured messages moved faster than they did for almost anyone else. When you had brothers in Frankfurt, Vienna, Paris, Naples and London, all with financial incentive to pass information quickly and accurately, you had a real-time communication advantage over governments that relied on slower official dispatches. To put a number on just how significant that edge could be, in the early 19th century, official government dispatches between Brussels and London typically took 2 to 3 days under favourable conditions. The Rothschild couriers with priority access to fast horses and pre-arranged channel crossings could shave that window down considerably, and in the financial markets of 1815, hours were worth fortunes. This mattered enormously on the 18th of June 1815. The Battle of Waterloo was the decisive engagement of the Napoleonic Wars. Wellington's British and Allied forces, supported by Prussian troops under Field Marshal Blücher, faced Napoleon's army in the fields of what is now Belgium. The outcome was not a foregone conclusion. This was a bloody, brutal, back-and-forth fight that lasted most of the day, and for much of it, Napoleon appeared to have the upper hand. The stakes could not have been higher. A French victory meant the continuation of Napoleonic dominance over Europe. A French defeat meant Napoleon's final fall, and the end of over 20 years of continental warfare. In London, the bond markets, specifically British government bonds known as consols, were extraordinarily sensitive to news of the battle. If Napoleon won, British consols would likely collapse in value. If Wellington won, they would rise. Everyone in the city was waiting, and the problem was nobody knew. Consols had already been trading at deeply depressed levels compared to their pre-war prices, partly because years of ruinously expensive military campaigns had strained British public finances to their limit. The national debt had ballooned to figures that alarmed even optimistic observers, and investors understood that another round of prolonged warfare would place that debt under severe stress. The entire London market was, in effect, holding a single collective breath. This is where the famous story takes hold. According to the most widely repeated version, a Rothschild courier was present at or near the battlefield, received news of Wellington's victory before the official dispatches rode hard to the Belgian coast, crossed the Channel in rough weather. Some accounts include the drama of no boat captain being willing to sail until Rothschild's agent reportedly offered an enormous sum and delivered the news to Nathan in London ahead of anyone else. Now, this much is generally supported by what we know. There is solid evidence that the Rothschilds did receive early intelligence about Waterloo through their courier network. The exact timing, the exact route, the exact degree of the advantage, those details are murkier, and historians have debated them for 2 centuries. The famous carrier pigeon version, almost certainly embellished, likely invented later. But the informational edge itself, that appears to be real. What Nathan Rothschild actually did with that information is where the legend really ignites, and where the facts become genuinely difficult to separate from the mythology that grew up around him afterward. The famous version says this: Nathan arrived at the Royal Exchange, took up his customary position leaning against a pillar known as the Rothschild Pillar, and began, very quietly, very visibly, selling consols. Not buying, selling. And because Nathan Rothschild's instincts were watched and mimicked by virtually every other trader in the building, the other traders concluded that he must know something terrible. If Rothschild was selling, Napoleon must have won. The market followed him down. Consols fell, panic spread, sellers flooded the market. And then, allegedly, through agents working discreetly, Nathan quietly bought an enormous quantity of consols at the bottom of the crash, just before the official news of Wellington's victory arrived and drove prices back up dramatically. If this is accurate, it is one of the most elegant financial maneuvers in history. A deliberate misdirection, a manufactured panic, and a perfectly timed reversal that leveraged his informational advantage into a fortune. But here is where I want to be honest with you, because this channel is not interested in selling you a better story at the cost of a true one. Some serious historians have looked at this account and found it partially wanting. There is debate about exactly how much profit Nathan actually made on the consoles trade, specifically at this moment, and some suggest the story was dramatized in later retellings, possibly even by anti-Rothschild propagandists, who had very different motives for making the family seem all-powerful and sinister. The real financial gains from Waterloo may have been substantial, but somewhat more mundane. Correct positioning in the market before the battle, rather than a single dramatic theatrical maneuver at the exchange. The journalist and historian John Reeves, writing in 1887, helped cement some of the more theatrical elements of the tale, and his account drew on sources that were already at least one generation removed from the events themselves. By then, the story had passed through enough hands that separating the documented core from the embellishments had become genuinely difficult work. What is not in dispute is the outcome. After Waterloo and the end of the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan Mayer Rothschild was the most powerful private banker in Britain. Full stop. His firm handled enormous portions of British government debt. His credit was considered as reliable as the Bank of England's, possibly more so in some circles. He became, in a very real sense, the man who controlled the flow of gold in London, which meant he exerted enormous indirect influence over the British monetary system at a time when Britain was the financial centre of the world. There is a quote attributed to Nathan Rothschild, and I will flag that its exact wording is disputed and may be apocryphal, to the effect, that it did not matter who sat on the throne of England, because whoever controlled its money supply controlled England. Whether he said precisely that or not, it captures something essentially true about the position he had built for himself. He was not a king. He was not an elected official. He held no military rank. He was a Jewish merchant's son from a locked ghetto lane in Frankfurt who had constructed, through intelligence and relentless effort and extraordinary strategic vision, a financial empire that nation-states could not easily function without. And that, I think, is worth sitting with for a moment, because the Rothschild story gets hijacked so often in both directions. On one side, the wild conspiracy theories that have attached themselves to this family for 2 centuries, theories that tip quickly into anti-Semitism and bear very little resemblance to documented history. On the other, the impulse to sanitize the story entirely and pretend there was nothing unusual or worth examining about this concentration of financial power. The truth, as usual, is more interesting than either extreme. Nathan Rothschild was not a villain. He was not a secret world controller. He was a man of extraordinary capability who operated within the rules of his time, sometimes bending them cleverly, in a system that richly rewarded exactly his kind of intelligence. He also lived in a world where his family had been legally barred from owning property, from walking freely through a city, from exercising the civil rights that others took for granted. The success he built was not handed to him. It was constructed against a headwind that most of us will never fully appreciate. His eldest son, Lionel, would spend 11 years elected to the British Parliament before he was finally permitted to take his seat in 1858, because the oath of office required swearing on a Christian Bible, a legal barrier that Nathan himself never saw removed in his lifetime. The family's accumulation of financial power happened in direct and constant tension with legal and social exclusion that persisted for generations. He died in 1836, not yet 60 years old, leaving a firm and a fortune that his descendants carried forward for generations. NAM Rothschild & Sons still exists today, still headquartered in the City of London, still one of the most respected names in global finance. 2 centuries after Waterloo, the dynasty he built is still standing. Before we close, if you find yourself going deeper down rabbit holes like this one, the hidden levers behind great historical events, the people who shaped the world from the shadows of the official record, this channel is exactly where you belong. I would love for you to be part of this community. Hit subscribe and come along for every story we dig into together. There are a lot of them. So what do we make of Nathan Rothschild and Waterloo? The fully theatrical version, the deliberate feint at the exchange pillar, the manufactured panic, the perfect reversal, may be partly myth, but the underlying reality is not. A man with a faster intelligence network, a deeper understanding of financial leverage, and a ruthlessness of vision that matched any general on that Belgian battlefield, used the chaos of one of history's most decisive days to position himself and his family at the center of the global financial order. Whether the specific maneuver was exactly as described, the result is not in doubt. The Battle of Waterloo made Wellington a hero and Napoleon an exile, and it made Nathan Rothschild quietly and permanently one of the most powerful private individuals in the world. There is something almost poetic about that. The battle that ended an emperor's ambitions also cemented the rise of a family that had started in a locked lane in Frankfurt, forbidden even to walk freely through the city, that now, in a very real sense, answered to them. I cannot tell you whether Nathan stood at that pillar and deliberately triggered a panic. The historical record is genuinely uncertain on that point. But I can tell you this. Everything we know about how Nathan Mayer Rothschild operated, his intelligence network, his patience, his willingness to play a longer and more complicated game than anyone around him, makes it entirely plausible. More than plausible. It sounds like exactly the kind of move he would make. What do you think? Did Nathan Rothschild engineer one of history's greatest financial deceptions at Waterloo? Or was the famous story shaped more by legend than by ledger? I want to hear your take in the comments below. The history community here has some of the sharpest minds I know, and this one deserves a real conversation. Next time, we are going to follow the money in a different direction entirely, into the ancient world, where an empire's entire economy was once run through a single temple complex, and the priests who ran it knew secrets that governments would kill to suppress. You are not going to want to miss that one. Until then, keep asking the questions nobody else is asking. I will see you in the next one.